Senate President Marvin York conceded today it may be overly optimistic to think that lawmakers can finish up their work by the end of next week. He says there's just too much paperwork involved. He'd like to call a recess again next Tuesday and have lawmakers come back the following Tuesday to let the paperwork catch up. That would put adjournment at June 30th. The recess, as we have seen, has become pretty common. It was used the last couple of weeks as a cooling off period to break a deadlock on certain funding bills, and it may be used again for purely technical reasons. At any rate, just as the word adjournment is a familiar part of legislative vocabulary, so is the word recess. Bella Shaw, Action 4 at the state capitol. It's the old folks who are hit the hardest by the tax. A lot of them are sick and need prescription drugs to make them get better. And they don't think it's fair to be taxed for something they can't help. This year, the legislature is really thinking about removing the tax, but it wouldn't be effective until July of next year. That may not seem like a long time, but one more year of the tax can add up to a lot of money.
Well, my wife takes $80 a month worth of medicine, and that's quite a bit of sales tax to me.
Oklahoma is one of the few states in the nation that still taxes people for being sick, and it can amount to a lot of money, some $10 million a year. A lot of people think this tax is unfair, but it may be next year before lawmakers do anything about it. Bella Shaw, Action 4 in southwest Oklahoma City.
Chuck Guskey's been involved with ham radios most of his life now. He's got thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment inside of his home. Outside, he's got a 78-foot-high antenna. A city ordinance requires antennas in Oklahoma City to be only 50 feet high, and a city inspector ordered the tower down. Now, Guskey says that's unfair because the shorter tower severely limits his freedom of speech.
It's highly restrictive to us because we're, by federal law, allowed to go much higher. However, it does restrict our range and the type of antennas we have to use in the frequencies that we operate. The 50-foot height is really not enough for the antennas to work properly.
Guskey's already asked the city to waive the antenna ordinance, but the city turned him down after a number of neighbors complained the $3,000 radio tower hurt adjoining property values. So, Guskey filed a $25,000 lawsuit against the city. He hopes to prove federal laws allowing an antenna height of 200 feet is stronger than the local ordinance limiting antennas to 50 feet. Mark O'Neill, Action 4 in northwest Oklahoma City.
The Black Summit Conference is designed to probe the spiritual, social, economic, and political factors facing blacks in Oklahoma. All through today and tomorrow, there will be a number of speakers addressing issues that concern blacks most. The conference is broke down into different workshops in which several audiences can listen to subjects that really interest them.
He says, give us a plan of action.
One of the main topics of discussion were the Reagan economic policies. Blacks are worried that a lot of gains will be lost unless blacks in Oklahoma and around the country band together and take action. There are also concerns for jobs. Blacks are worried that a lot of gains will be lost here too, simply because the market gets tighter and tighter each day. They're reminded of the 1960s when many cities exploded in violence across the country, brought on by black frustration, including the lack of economic opportunity. And the speakers at today's conference don't want that to happen again. Representative Bernard McIntyre talks about what he hopes will come out of the two-day conference.
Every major civil rights organization in the state of Oklahoma is here. Most of the influential people, not all of them, but most of them. And we've got a lot of rank and file, just citizens who want to be informed, and they will go back all over the state into the various communities explaining what's going on here, and then we will be doing some follow-up stuff ourselves, too.
McIntyre hopes to make conferences like this an annual event, and that each year more and more people participate. Ed Stewart, Action 4, Langston University.
Heading at 260.
When the air traffic controllers walk away from their jobs Monday morning, they won't just ground a lot of planes, they will ground a lot of passengers who would have been aboard those planes. The strike is expected to cost the airlines an estimated $80 to $100 million a day. Part of those passengers and part of that revenue will go to bus lines. Buses have traditionally been considered as a less expensive means of travel, usually used in cases where time was not an important factor. But with an impending airstrike that may cut air traffic by 85%, that will probably change. Passengers who would normally have flown for pleasure will be forced to take buses or trains, so pleasure travel on buses should be up. But buses cannot meet the needs of a business trip, and so businessmen are especially hoping that the air controller strike will be a short one. Charles Schnetzer, Action 4. When the 1125 Greyhound from Amarillo, Texas pulled up at the downtown bus station over an hour late, the passengers weren't frustrated, they were relieved. Shortly after the bus left Amarillo, a man walked to the front and after a brief argument with the driver pulled a gun. The passengers were warned not to move or the driver would be shot and the bus would crash. The man told the driver that there were 5 other people aboard the bus trying to kill him, and if he had to die, he wouldn't die alone. 61-year-old Minnie Williams was aboard the bus at the time. The hijacker put her and her grandson off on the highway because he thought she had a gun.
He said, well, it's a state trooper right behind this bus, and I'm making you get off, and you flag the state trooper down and tell him that this bus is being hijacked. He said, leave your grandson on the bus. I said, no, I won't leave my little grandson on the bus. I was just hysterics. I almost had a heart attack. I don't know what my feeling was, really.
The driver of the bus, Michael Banfield, says the gunman appeared to be rational, but the 2-hour ordeal called for calm among the passengers.
I kept every now and then telling them just be quiet, don't do nothing, don't move or nothing. Because if I went, we all did, because we were going to crash. And then as soon as we got into Oklahoma, he had me stop again, and he got off with a man. And somehow or other he threw his gun. I guess he saw all the guns pointed at him.
For the passengers aboard the bus, the ordeal is over, and they can continue on their way. But investigators now have to discover what caused the gunman to commandeer a bus. Charles Schnetzer, Action 4.
This potato chip bag cost about twice as much as the chips inside. The same rule of thumb holds true for the pancake syrup bottle, the chewing gum wrapper, and soft drink bottles. Many times when products increase in price at the grocery store, consumers feel the American farmer is making a huge profit.
And that's not really true at all. The farmers are in a very tough situation financially now, but when the consumer price index comes out and they quote the food prices going up, very often those are not food prices but packaging prices, transportation costs, and the like, which are pushing retail food prices up much faster than the farm price of that commodity.
However, Department of Agriculture officials point out that foods in the United States are considered among the safest on earth, and they say the main reason is that the packaging protects the food from light, heat, oxygen, and pests. Ben McCain, Action 4.
Oklahoma City must process thousands of gallons of raw sewage each day. The waste is carefully filtered to remove the undesirable parts. The byproduct of the process is this sewer sludge. Oklahoma City produces so much of the sludge, it has a hard time getting rid of it. The city staff has recommended dumping some of the sewer sludge in the city landfill at Northeast 36th and Mosley. That proposal has angered some Forest Park residents who live nearby, but the city staff maintains that the Northeast site is the best choice.
It's a proper place for it. It's been reviewed by everyone who has an interest in the environmental effects on it. It's located well in terms of transportation arteries. We can all sympathize with anyone who would believe that it would be better if it were located somewhere further away. But it's almost always got to be located closer to someone if it's going to be farther away from someone else.
I'm convinced that Oklahoma City could come up with alternative sites if they just look. Our idea is that everybody ought to bear some of the responsibility of taking care of their own sewage. So Northwest Oklahoma City ought to have one of these. Southwest Oklahoma City ought to have one of these. And they can have one if the city staff will just look.
Forest Park officials say they'll formally oppose the plan when it's presented to the Oklahoma City Council next Tuesday. Scott Wallace, Action 4, Forest Park.
Brita Trimble of Norman has been competing in Arabian horse shows 7 years. This afternoon at the state fairgrounds, Brita was working with her horse. Tomorrow she'll enter the Arabian in competition. Brita says she's learned a lot about life from competing in the horse shows.
It's taught me a lot. I probably wouldn't be a good sport when I lose and stuff, but I've learned to lose and take it easily, knowing that I've done it wrong or the judge, and there's always going to be a next time.
In addition to the Arabian horse shows this week, lectures and demonstrations by top professionals in the horse industry will be featured. Other young people like Brita will be involved in the spectacular, which concludes Saturday. Ben McCain, Action 4 at the State Fairgrounds.
To begin with, Amtrak doesn't stop here anymore, so this has to be a circus train. Then again, the passengers turn out to be 11 feet tall and weigh several tons. Their escort is the world-famous animal trainer, Gunther Gebel-Williams. So, kids of all ages, this has to be the arrival of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, which usually starts off with a traditional elephant walk to the Myriad. Elephants usually look like stately beasts on TV. Too bad we can't transmit the smell of 20 to 30 elephants cooped up in a small rail car for 36 hours. Oh well, it'd ruin the romance of the circus anyway. Leading the pack.
Are you ready to go right ahead?
On this walk is Miss Oklahoma World, Angela McKenzie. She's obviously had experience with animals and won't let a little bit of elephant intimidate.
Oh my God!
You'll be happy to know Girl and Beast survived the 100-yard trek, and you can see the larger of the two all this week. Ted Brown, Action 4 from the Myriad.
The effects of the low water pressure were first felt here at Baptist Medical Center around 8 o'clock last night, when the water pressure got so low that water could not be pumped to the upper floors. And by 10 o'clock this morning, the whole hospital was dry.
When it became obvious pressure would not be restored for a while, Baptist put its emergency water plan into effect. A local dairy began delivering water packed in milk cartons. Those deliveries supplied essential areas of the hospital so that patients would not suffer from the water shortage.
We've not really experienced a decrease in the number of surgeries. Mainly the effect has been on the patient baths this morning, limiting of the fluids. We've had to switch to use of juices and other types of liquids for our patients rather than strictly water today.
Baptist expects a 500-gallon water delivery soon. That should be enough water to keep things running indefinitely. But just in case, the hospital has turned off its fountains and dishwashers to make sure there will be enough of the precious fluid for essential services. Scott Wallace, Action 4 at Baptist Medical Center.
Water pressure is a little bit like me pushing against this wall. When you've got 3 or 4 water plants and a number of pumps in place in this system, in effect they're pushing against one another in many different places in the system, maintaining the pressure. And when you suddenly remove one, you not only have lost the pressure from that pump, but the resulting counterforce wipes out the pressure. And this is why we had water pressure problems as far south as 77th and South Penn and other places. Side to
Police were called to this home in the 2700 block of Cambridge Court shortly after 9 o'clock this morning. They found the body of a 54-year-old white woman on the living room floor. She had been stabbed several times. Her name is being withheld pending notification of all family members. When the woman failed to show up at work, her employer asked the victim's daughter to check up on her. The daughter found her mother's body in the home.
Any apparent motive, like robbery?
We've not established any motive at all right now.
Okay, so you don't have any suspects for us then?
No, we have no suspect information. We've developed nothing to this point.
After checking the crime scene thoroughly, authorities removed the victim from the North Side home. But by late this afternoon, police still had no idea who would have entered the woman's home or why. Larry Otis, Action 4 on the Northwest Side.
That's right. You had this big garbage can type deal. What it was, you'd fill up with water. That's when you took a bath on one of those things.
Reunions, like photographs, were made for remembering, and the 60 or so members of the 86 Fighter Group have a lot of mutual memories. They started together at Will Rogers Field in 1942. From there it was fighting in North Africa, fighting in Sicily and Italy, then on into France and Germany. Not everyone made it, but 36 years later, some of the ones that did are getting together again, just up the road from where it all began.
I guess I was primarily interested in seeing whether everyone is still as young and good looking as I am, right? And it's been kind of an experience, and I think I probably recognize 90% of the guys. That's not too bad, I guess, after 36 years.
Howard says about 10 members of the group got together last year in Washington and decided to find as many others as they could for this reunion. 68 out of some 300 showed up. He says they plan to do it again next year, and maybe more will be there to help each other recall the shared memories of a world at war. Ted Brown, Action 4.
This appropriation package provides for a record salary increase and adjustments. We've appropriated from the general fund of the state of Oklahoma some $40 million, which is more than the previous 4 years put together appropriated by the state legislature. This year, that $40 million from the general fund plus all other sources of paying salaries will amount to a $90 million increase for our state employees. In addition to this increase, we have made improvements in the state personnel system. And I want to say to you this morning that the Federal Office of Personnel Management has called this, and I quote, the most significant reform of the system since its inception in 1959.
Basically, it's a political decision made by politicians for politicians, with the implications being that it would take the basic control of programming away from the broadcaster and put it in the political hands. The control factor of being able to discriminate as to what we program should be in our hands, not the politicians' hands, who it's benefiting in the first place.
Several of our viewers have written in to say that during the recent spring storms they suffered storm damage to their houses. Can they deduct any part of this on next year's income tax return? Well, the law does provide for casualty loss deductions on your income tax return for damages resulting from a sudden, unexpected, or unusual event. The amount you can claim is not necessarily the amount that it costs you to repair the damage. You must also consider the decrease in the fair market value of your property as a result of the damage, the cost you have in the property, and any insurance reimbursement to which you are entitled. A guide for determining your loss and the amount deductible for tax purposes can be obtained from the Internal Revenue Service. For Action 4, this is Ray Vaughn with Legal Briefs. A viewer writes in and says, we sold some real estate back in 1956, and since then we've discovered a number of abstracts covering the property. We wonder if the abstracts are worth anything. What about historical value? Well, an abstract is a history of the ownership of a particular piece of property, and therefore is most valuable to the person that owns the property. Since these abstracts are not current, in other words, the most recent transactions have not been included in them, they are probably of little, if any, monetary value. Since an abstract also does not contain original documents, but copies of those filed with the county clerk, a new one can be made any time from the records available at the courthouse. Thus, it's doubtful that your abstracts would have any historical interest either. For Action 4, this is Ray Vaughn with Legal Briefs.
Witnesses say 36-year-old Gladys Jones was babysitting in her mobile home early this afternoon when a man burst inside and pulled a pistol on her. About that time, Mrs. Jones's 16-year-old stepdaughter Deborah and her brother Michael arrived at the home. They watched as the gunman forced the victim into her car.
She said, well, I don't want to go, this man. He said, shh, be quiet. She said, this man got a gun on me. She said, get in the house. I ran in the house, told Michael, and Michael got in the car with them, went down on John Spencer Road. He put up beside them and told Michael to get out, had the gun in his face, told him to get out. He ran back here. We come and called Daddy on his job. He come here and he called the police.
The kidnapping now becomes a waiting game, both for the victim's relatives and for the police. A statewide all-points bulletin has been issued for the suspect's car, and if some new leads don't turn up within the next few hours, then the FBI will be brought into the case. Scott Wallace, Action 4 in Jones.
He knew it was it, he blasted it to pieces coming through that door. You didn't want the baby because you knew the baby would be some trouble.
He did the same.
And she introduced us. She said, this is James, and this is my brother and stepdaughter, like that. And so she said, here, take the baby. We were babysitting our little niece, her niece. And so she said, take the baby. I took the baby. He went in the back room. He took her clothes and her shoes and put them in the car. Took a picture of ours. He put it in front of him. And I figured out that when we came in the house, he had the gun behind the picture. And he had it on her.